takes pleasure in attracting a stellar list of speakers that address today's most relevant issues. The club's place as a refuge for rich discussion and networking has never wavered after 123 seasons.
We are dedicated to encouraging debate on the issues that matter to this city, this province, and this country.
The Canadian Club is one of the most important podiums anywhere in the world that a Canadian can speak to, tell Canadians what it is that they think, develop those thoughts. And so I want to thank you for that very, very much.
Please join me in thanking our esteemed panelists today.
Through our programs and events, including our youth and young leaders programs, our diversity partnerships, our joint events, and our media and social media opportunities, we offer you access to dynamic political, social, and business figures from abroad and right here at home.
The platform from which the eloquence of Canada has flowed all of that time, whether it be business, education, politics, sports, arts, and culture. If someone wants to say something to Canadians about this country and about the future of this country, this is the venue you choose.
Hello, and thank you for joining us. My name is Ali Sinha, and I'm a director of the Canadian Club Toronto. As we all know, COVID-19 has proven to be more than just a health crisis. It has damaged economies, cost jobs, and widened existing social inequities. But it has also illustrated the strength of Canada's communities, their resilience. Today, we're joined by the Honourable McKenna for a discussion on smart public infrastructure investments, helping people in neighborhoods most in need, and building sustainable and resilient communities for the low carbon economy of our future. It'll be an exciting discussion, and we know that's why everybody's joined us today. And just before we dive into today's topic, here's some information about how you can participate with us. The click here to switch stream button helps you find your way if the internet is slow. The video quality may decrease, but the audio quality should remain strong. Once you click on the questions tab, you can enter your questions in the window, and they'll be sent through to our moderator, Anita McKeown. The request help button, located in the bottom right corner of the page, is for technical support. Thank you to today's event sponsor, Power Corporation of Canada. Thanks to their generous support, today's event was free of charge for all attendees. The Canadian Club is a non-profit, and we've been gathering people together for 124 years now, including during this very strange year in a very new way. It is because of our sponsors, like Power Corp, that we can continue to do this. We are grateful for your support of today's discussion. And now to introduce our speaker. The Honourable McKenna is Canada's Minister of Infrastructure and Communities. In 2015, Minister McKenna was elected the first female member of Parliament for Ottawa Centre and appointed Minister of Environment and Climate Change. As of October 2019, the minister was re-elected as an MP and appointed as the Minister of Infrastructure and Communities. In this portfolio, she is working towards building a more resilient, cleaner, and prosperous country and creating a better future for future generations of Canadians. We're very excited to hear from the minister today. She's also an avid swimmer and a proud Hamiltonian. I'm sure she'll tell you more about that because the swimming analogies are plentiful. Following the minister's remarks, she'll be joined in conversation by our president of the Canadian Club Toronto, Anita McKeown. One of the club's traditions that has not changed in this virtual world is that we make a toast to our country. Usually, this is done in person with the raising of a glass. So let's make a nod towards the screen and toast Canada with whatever you may have in front of you. To Canada.
Canada.
Thank you very much to all of our guests. Thank you to Anita and Minister McKenna. I'll turn the Canadian Club podium over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Awi. It's very appropriate that Awi would introduce me since we went to law school at McGill many, many years ago. Thank you very much to Anita and to the Canadian Club for having me. I can't imagine a more important time to have discussions about the future of our country. And the Canadian Club has played such an important role for 124 years. There will be some swimming analogies, but also Hamilton will figure in this as well. The Canadian Club started 124 years ago in Hamilton. So I feel that's very appropriate. I want to start by recognizing I'm speaking on the traditional territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe peoples. Actually, behind you in my office, you can see an Algonquin canoe that was used in the Ottawa River. When we think about 2020, it really has been a year unlike any other in our lifetimes. There's really no hyperbole in saying this. You think about how it started. It started with a plane crash in Iran where 157, I believe, Canadians were killed. There were wildfires across the west of the United States. Now we're in the worst pandemic in a century and the worst economic downturn since the Great Depression. And I think we all lived through a US election like none other. I think I finally have caught up on my sleep. This year has tested our collective resolve, our community spirit. It's tested governments in Canada at every level to respond quickly to a host of challenges, all in real time. It's tested our health systems, our education systems, our social safety net. I'm here to talk about our government's plan and vision for infrastructure and how we can do this together. In fact, I think it's an optimistic discussion that we can have because I actually, despite everything, I feel optimistic about the future of our country. We need to get out of this economic crisis. We need to get out of this health crisis. And we need to now build for our future, our long-term prosperity with good jobs, but also a cleaner and more resilient future for all Canadians. I'm going to make the case why significant, smart investments in Canada's infrastructure will keep us strong and healthy, whatever 2021 and beyond throws at us. So let's talk about what we've been up to when it comes to our Investing in Canada infrastructure plan. It's a $180 billion plan. We put it in motion when we came to office starting in 2016. It's a historic 10-year plan for investing in all kinds of infrastructure. Sure, that's roads and bridges, but it's also renewable energy, affordable housing, public transit, clean drinking water, better internet everywhere, as well as building climate resiliency. When you factor in that most of our programs require matching funding from other levels of government, including $33 billion that we're investing in partnership with provinces and territories, we're talking about $500 billion in government investments to build Canada up. When the Prime Minister asked me to take on this critically important portfolio a year ago, I set 3 priorities. I only work in 3s. 1, to work collaboratively with all levels of government and with other partners to get projects built quickly, creating jobs and economic growth. 2, to ensure that the money that we invest, taxpayer dollars, is helping us move to a low carbon future that is cleaner, more resilient, and more prosperous. And 3, to build infrastructure, more public transit, high-speed broadband, wastewater, clean energy that improves the quality of life for all Canadians. We need to build more equitable and more inclusive communities. COVID-19 didn't change these priorities. It just made them all more immediate and urgent. I'm a mother, and I believe we need to stretch dollars. Every taxpayer dollar needs to do triple duty. And I'm very, very focused on outcomes. But I want you to know that our infrastructure plan didn't pause during the pandemic. When COVID-19 came along, it was clear that we needed to adjust our programs to help Canadians deal with the economic and health crisis. Since March 1st, under the largest program led by my department, the Investing in Canada infrastructure program with provinces and territories, we've approved over 700 projects representing a federal investment of $1.2 billion. This is contributing to good jobs across the country, from planning to design to construction to businesses and all along the supply chain. We also launched a new COVID-19 stream within that program, with the federal government paying 80 cents of every dollar so that provinces and municipalities can get working on a wide range of pandemic resilient projects. That's projects like upgrading schools or long-term care homes with practical things like HVAC, new HVAC and physical distancing measures, or building new parks, cycling and walking paths to help Canadians get outside and stay active. In Ontario alone, this stream represents $1 billion in federal funding. I'm really hoping that provinces move quickly so projects can get ahead with what's left of this construction season. But it's not enough for governments to simply shovel out infrastructure dollars. It's about the outcomes Canadians can get in return. As I said, every taxpayer dollar has to do triple duty: grow the economy, combat climate change, and promote social equality. So let's talk about the economic growth and jobs. It's clear we're in the worst recession since the Great Depression. As Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland said recently at the Toronto Global Forum, getting to a broad, robust, and complete recovery means we're going to have to build our way out of this pandemic. And that means infrastructure investment, and I quote her, on a meaningful scale. And don't worry, I've spent the last 6 months reading about Roosevelt and the New Deal for inspiration. FDR understood that investments in infrastructure were not only needed to help the economy recover from the Great Depression, they were critical to creating jobs across the country, to getting nation-building projects built, and to inspiring hope for a better future. And I think we all need hope right now. And that's really the opportunity of meaningful and targeted investments in infrastructure. In the speech from the throne on September 23rd, we set out our government's direction and goals, including our ambition to create 1 million jobs as we recover from the economic shock of the pandemic. Infrastructure investments are key to that ambition. There's a clear business case. According to the IMF, in terms of jobs, investment in traditional infrastructure, clean water plants, storm sewers, wastewater treatment, bridges, generates between 2 and 8 jobs for every $1 million spent. But when you invest in green infrastructure, public transit, more efficient buildings, the job payoff is even bigger, between 5 and 14 jobs for every $1 million spent. So economic growth first, then climate action. As you know, I previously served as environment minister in this government. Now at Infrastructure and Communities, I have the opportunity to roll up my sleeves and help build the clean future we all want. The way I look at it, investments in infrastructure either increase or they reduce emissions, and they either make our communities more or less resilient to climate change. And I'm sure you know my choice, and the choice that I hear from Canadians across the country: cleaner and more climate resilient. I'm not alone though. 2020 began with a wake-up call to the financial sector by BlackRock. The international investment giant told its clients that it was making sustainability central to how they invest and manage risk. Climate risk is investment risk, says BlackRock, and also our own Mark Carney. Simply put, sustainable portfolios can produce better long-term risk-adjusted results. And if you don't go in that direction, I think, as Mark Carney also said, you're at risk of going bankrupt. Third, promoting social equality. I got into electoral politics to make a difference, and frankly, the effects of COVID-19 have only highlighted some of the concerns that made me want to seek public office. Vulnerable communities, racialized communities, are disproportionately impacted by the infrastructure deficit. Whether it's inadequate access to public transit, affordable housing, or safe community spaces, it's clear that what we invest in and where can have a huge impact in a person's life. The pandemic has only highlighted the need for these public services, such as inclusive community spaces that deliver childcare, employment services, and health and mental services. We're also reminded that public transit is critical to get essential workers to their jobs in hospitals, pharmacies, and grocery stores. And I don't need to talk to you about the underinvestment and infrastructure deficit in Indigenous communities. It is simply unconscionable, and we need to make progress. We need to keep investing in infrastructure that improves social equality outcomes by targeting underserved communities. I'm thinking of the YMCA Calgary Hub Facility Project. In 2018, our government provided $6 million in funding for this project, supportive transitional housing for 100 women, 90 childcare spaces, as well as a variety of other spaces and services with social benefits. Or the retrofit of Bayvelt High School in the town of Bayvelt, Newfoundland and Labrador. Library, gymnasium, family resource center, daycare, and yes, even a bowling alley. Don't doubt for a second how important that facility is to the people of that community and to their futures. Let me give just one example of how significant, smart, focused investments in infrastructure achieve multiple benefits. Let's talk about transit. If you live in the GTHA, you all know about traffic congestion. I grew up in Hamilton, and it used to take 45 minutes by car to get to Toronto. Some days it can take double that time. That's less time for people to spend with their families, less time being productive at work. It's also more air pollution, and the transportation sector accounts for 30% of Canada's total greenhouse gas emissions. There's a clear case for the historic investments we're making in public transportation, including major subway and LRT projects. Our commitment to get 5,000 zero-emission school and transit buses in circulation over the next 5 years, and better cycling and walking paths to get people around. Every dollar does triple duty. And the really exciting part is that Canada has terrific zero-emission innovators in this field. Companies like New Flyer in Winnipeg, Green Power in Vancouver, Nova Bus in Saint-Eustache, Lion Electric in Saint-Jérôme, Quebec, plus electric bus charging companies like eCamion here in Ontario. The Canadian Urban Transit Association suggests that the economic benefits of Canada's transit system is $19 billion annually, and it provides hundreds of thousands of jobs. Conversely, traffic congestion in our cities and lack of transportation between smaller communities is costing our economy, $15 billion in lost productivity. And by improving transit networks in Toronto, Vancouver, and Montreal alone, we can reduce emissions by up to 4.2 megatons per year. And investing in public transit particularly benefits women, youth, and members of marginalized communities. If you look at our other investment priorities, whether it's broadband, clean energy, retrofits, affordable housing, childcare, community and recreation centers, clean drinking water, they all have triple benefits. The bottom line is that good infrastructure supports economic and human development. It's key to growing Canada's economy, creating good jobs, fighting climate change, and reducing social inequality, and ensuring a better quality of life for all. So here's the deal, to paraphrase Joe Biden. Since first getting elected in 2015, our government has been making historic investments to address the infrastructure deficit across Canada. It's not just a talking point, but there's more to do. I'm going to illustrate with two numbers, 13 billion and 1 billion. $13.3 billion is how much our government has invested in approved public transit projects from November 2015 to December 2019. The other number, $1 billion, was how much the previous government invested in public transit during the previous 4 years. Okay, so that sounds like partisan point scoring, but it's not, it's just numbers. And the real point is that even with all the recent investment, Canada's current infrastructure deficit is estimated to be between $110 billion and $270 billion. So we can't pat ourselves on the back. For the good of our economy, for the good of Canadians, we need to continue investing. So how do we get there? Well, direct public investments are one way, and we've stepped up as a government. But there simply aren't enough taxpayer dollars to meet our infrastructure needs. The good news is that Canadian and international investors, including major Canadian pension funds, are looking for safe long-term opportunities. That's why the Canada Infrastructure Bank is critical to expanding Canada's ambition by bringing in the private sector to partner with the public sector to get more infrastructure built that improves the lives of Canadians. The bank's new growth plan announced on October 1st is another piece of the puzzle. It's a 3-year, $10 billion plan that will create approximately 60,000 jobs while growing our economy, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and also connecting Canadians. The Canada Infrastructure Bank is leveraging the private sector to get more good infrastructure built. Projects that will deliver more high-speed broadband, investments in renewables and transmission of clean energy, green retrofits for commercial buildings, agriculture investments in areas like irrigation, as well as investments in zero-emission buses and their supporting infrastructure like charging stations. These investments align with our government's priorities in addition to the direct investments we're funding. So we have direct government investments in infrastructure, more than $180 billion over a decade, and we have the Canada Infrastructure Bank drawing in private capital to make public dollars go even further. But we need to draw it all together. How? I'm focused on developing Canada's first ever national infrastructure investment assessment. So that may sound boring, but stay with me. It means using data and evidence to identify Canada's long-term infrastructure deficit, its needs and priorities, in linking our investments with our policy outcomes and ensuring a plan for recovery that creates jobs, competitive advantage, and long-term growth, while building a cleaner, more inclusive future for all Canadians. Assessments of this type are already underway in the UK, Australia, and New Zealand. But the expert panel on sustainable finance that advised me in my formal role, as well as the finance minister, as well as the Advisory Council on Economic Growth, emphasize how important such a national inventory and analysis is to better outcomes. I'm making it my mission to see that we make historic investments done, but we do it right. In conclusion, if anything good has come out of this pandemic, it's a heightened awareness of what it's like to be part of a community and how much community matters. It's critical that we continue to look out for each other, that we count on each other, that we protect each other, and that we work together. I find myself constantly thinking about how infrastructure investments support and strengthen communities across Canada. And we need to attract new investments from everywhere. Businesses want to locate, as do people, where they know infrastructure is modern, clean, and resilient. Canada has an excellent opportunity to be the low carbon economy that people beat a path to. Global investors, people want to immigrate to, but we need to keep on making the smart choices now. Every dollar we invest should do triple duty, creating jobs and economic stability, making communities cleaner and more resilient, and making sure communities are equitable so that every Canadian has a fair shot at success. Together, we need to act now to rethink our approach to infrastructure planning and investment. Our actions and policies will shape both this moment in history and what will come after. This is a huge opportunity for Canada, and if we work together, we will build the Canada we all want. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Really appreciate your remarks, and we've had a lot of questions coming in already. Viewers, keep them coming. I'll sprinkle them in throughout our conversation. So you are the first cabinet minister we are speaking to since the election result was decided in the US. So before we jump in, what do you think Joe Biden's election means for Canada and Canadians?
Well, look, in Canada, I think we're a spectator. The U.S. Americans decide the outcome of their own election. But when you look at the election, the president-elect Joe Biden, he's run not only on climate action, which of course I'm very pleased to see, but also on a $2 trillion infrastructure plan. It's about sustainable infrastructure and clean energy. And I think there's a huge opportunity for Canada. I think that, the Prime Minister has always said it doesn't matter who is president in the United States, we're always going to look after Canada's interests. And I think that's incredibly important. And so as we look at the opportunities for Canada, I think it's really important to make the case that we are partners. So I'll give you an example, and maybe this can, maybe be a metaphor for what we could do together. So I've had many conversations with Governor Whitmer in Michigan. And we're building the Gordie Howe Bridge. That is a huge economic opportunity. It's a trade corridor that's creating good jobs right now, but also is linking our economies in a way that is critically important to both the success of the US and Canada. And I think we always need to remind Americans that we are their largest trading partner. This is a $5.7 billion project, creating 2,500 jobs. Michigan exports $30 billion of goods to Canada. We export $59 billion in goods to Michigan. There's also community benefits that are making a huge impact for businesses on both sides. And it's really linking our economies even more closely together. That's just one example. But on the clean infrastructure side, I see many other opportunities. Transmission lines, for example. We are 80% clean electricity. We don't tell that story enough. I don't think people know that we're really a leader in the world. And we should be thinking about transmission lines, not just north, east, west, which we should, because we have provinces that need to get off coal, but also more opportunities north, south. So another example would be the supply chain for vehicles. There's a lot of focus in Canada. We've got some really good stories about investments here in electric vehicles. As I said, on electric buses, we're a world leader. And we also have the minerals that are critical for batteries and for vehicles. So I think there's an opportunity, being someone from Hamilton who understands how important the auto sector is, there's real opportunities to work together. So I think there's many, many examples. We, of course, have to wait. The Biden administration has obviously not started yet, but I think we need to be thinking about this. And you look for opportunities with any administration. So I think there are some great opportunities, but I think we will also have to make the case that North America is a market. So, I mean, everyone, always wants to think about jobs in their own country and opportunities for their own businesses. But I think that we want to make sure that it isn't just about the U.S. It's about thinking about about Canada and the U.S. as a North American market. I think that's really a huge opportunity in both countries.
Lots of exciting opportunities. I'm looking forward to see how it plays out. Okay, going back to your remarks that you just shared with us, you mentioned that one of your priorities was to get projects approved quickly and working with all levels of government. How have you done that specifically, and what are some of the challenges that you've faced?
Yeah, it's funny because I'm just based on outcomes. So I'm like, we just need, right now, more than ever, we need to get projects going quickly because we have a health crisis, we have an economic crisis, and we're seeing less construction in the private sector. So government has a huge role to play, working with companies, but also with unions. And so that's been a focus. So quietly, we've been doing our work while there's been a lot of focus on the health side by our government, rightly so. We've approved 700 projects, which is it's $1.2 billion in investment, but also thinking about how do we adjust our programs. So I talked about the COVID-19 stream. The intention behind the COVID-19 stream was to have a more streamlined process. And it's, you learn, I spoke to conservatives who were around in 2008, and I think you can learn across party lines about how do you do things quickly, especially when you need the investments and you need the jobs. And this stream is list-based. It is, the federal government's putting in 80 cents on every dollar, recognizing that it's a challenging situation for municipalities and provinces. And these are projects that would be built within the next year. So that is what, as I say, I'm hoping the provinces will really take that up because we really do need to be moving quickly. And this has been a focus of mine. How do you be very practical? I'm a very practical person. And I think it's critically important that we just figure out, okay, how do we move forward? But that doesn't mean you forget outcomes. This isn't about building gazebos. This is about actually getting real outcomes that are consistent. And so in the COVID-19 stream, we're looking at projects that would help with the pandemic. So retrofitting schools or long-term care homes. We know we need to do that. That will create good jobs, but also build resilience as we're living with COVID-19, getting people out to nature. And that's sort of the short term, but even before the pandemic hit, it's kind of hard to remember those days. I went to the UK to learn about their national infrastructure assessment because I think every country is faced with this challenge. One, you need to be willing to invest in infrastructure. We have very low interest rates. We need to be creating jobs and stimulating our economy. So obviously with the pandemic, it makes the case. But and we've got, as our finance minister has been very clear and very good explaining, we're in a great fiscal position to be doing this. This isn't something that will go on forever, but we need now, the most important thing, well, one is to address the health pandemic, because that's critical to getting our economy on track, but also making these investments. And so in the UK, what they learned is you need to have a long-term vision on your infrastructure investments. You also need to provide certainty. We've talked about commitment to permanent public transit funding. When you're making investments, you need to know, the money is going to be there so you can make these long-term investments. And for investors, so I talk to pension funds, institutional investors, they want to understand the pipeline of projects. And so I think we need to understand, what is the deficit, the infrastructure deficit? Where do we want to be? What outcomes do we want to get? And then what is the path to getting there? Because we're building literally for the next 30, 40, 50, in some cases with bridges, 100 years. And I think we need to be really focused.
Just picking up what you said about the infrastructure assessment that you learned about in the UK. I was surprised to hear that we didn't already have that in Canada. What can you tell us a little bit more what that is and why it's so important?
I mean, I was kind of surprised too. I think that, look, our government has made and is making historic investments in infrastructure, and we've identified priority areas. We've identified green infrastructure, public transit, rebuilding community culture and rec centers, and way beyond that, trade corridors, investments in Indigenous communities to address the infrastructure deficit. But those are areas I think that you really need to be looking at. Okay, what are our big challenges? This is how the UK approached it. But say you take 3 challenges, and I'm not saying this is what it will be, but you could take carbon. We have too much carbon. We're going to have to figure that out. Climate change is real. So what does that mean? What are the opportunities? What does that mean for clean energy? What does that mean for the built environment and being, building more, retrofitting more buildings and building to net zero? What does that mean across all sectors? You can take connectivity. We just made an announcement yesterday of historic investments in broadband, absolutely critical. So we need to be tackling connectivity and congestion. So if you take 3 C's, and I think those are areas, there are certainly areas that I think many Canadians would agree we need to be focused on. You now need to figure out, how do you get there? What is the investment that is needed, as opposed to what is, right now, what are we going to invest? But if you're going to look long-term, for Canada's economic, growth and for our productivity, but also to benefit all Canadians, what do you need to do to get there? What is the quantum of investments? Who are we looking to invest in these projects? I've talked a bit, and we probably will have an opportunity to talk more about the Canada Infrastructure Bank. And really, what are the pipelines of projects that we need to get there? And what is the role of the, different levels of government and other players and other partners? So I think it's just about being more disciplined. I'm someone, and actually I love speaking to organizations like the Canadian Club, because I know you care about having a long-term outlook, about not, everything isn't just in sound bites, that you actually have to have some discipline. And I really believe that when you're investing taxpayer dollars, we owe it to be very, very thoughtful and mindful about those dollars, how they're being invested, how we're leveraging, how we're actually building what we've committed to doing. And we have many outcomes as a government. We've said net zero by 2050. That's not going to happen with a magic wand. That's going to happen with hard work every day and mapping out where are your emissions and where are your opportunities. Broadband, 98%, we want to have high-speed internet across the country by 2026. Need to some discipline on that. So I think it's just really about providing discipline and being very clear about what you want and how you're going to get there. So I think this is, in some ways, when I talk to people, I think sometimes eyes glaze over, but I actually think it's actually, may not be super sexy, but it's actually really important to getting multiple outcomes and actually being where we want to be, which I think we have an opportunity. We're very lucky, we're a prosperous country, but to have, the growth, but also the quality of life that we want and Canadians expect.
Yeah, we're a big country geographically with a relatively small population, so infrastructure is essential and always a tension point, right? How do you pay for it? You speak a lot about outcomes, and we've talked about getting projects approved quickly, but these are multi-year projects a lot of the time. And we've all, I think, no matter where you're listening from today, have seen those projects that drag on and on, go over budget, and years past. What have you learned about how to keep these projects on track?
Well, I mean, I think I'm someone who really believes on time and on budget. And I think that the federal government, often our role is really flowing money to different levels of government. I think there's an opportunity to work more closely, for example, with municipalities. You need to make sure that there's capacity. And so on climate, I'll take one example, that on climate, I don't want the fact that you need to look at climate when you build to be something that delays a project. It shouldn't, but capacity can be an issue. So I think we need to be supporting communities that may not have the capacity to, really delve into where you're going to get the reductions in emission. I don't think it's not necessarily particularly complicated, but it may be new for folks. So I think capacity is something. And I think just every day being really focused and disciplined and just seeing, are the projects on track? And I think that's none of this it's not rocket science. It can be challenging, but I think that, that is something that we owe taxpayers and we owe Canadians. And there are reasons that projects are delayed. We're talking about, in some cases, when you're talking about massive public transit projects, there's a whole range of reasons. It can be, you don't have enough workers. There could be supply chain issues related to COVID-19. But I think it's just, making sure you're always tracking how you're doing, and that the capacity is there locally and supporting communities. And I do hear sometimes that people say, well, these outcomes sound like it's going to be slower. I actually think that if you're going to be spending taxpayer dollars, you better get getting multiple outcomes. And I don't think it has to be slower, but I am looking internally about how our process is, because I don't want, grant applications to be about just filling in, details for the sake of filling in information. It's about, once again, about getting outcomes. So I think that, it's on all of us to make sure, what are we tracking? How do you not duplicate efforts? Because we have different levels of government there, and we want to make sure that we aren't duplicating efforts and that we're all working together to deliver for Canadians. And as I said, I cannot emphasize it, and I really believe that it's critically important that the federal government, as we're making these infrastructure investments, we get projects that are shovel-worthy as quickly as possible, because we do need jobs.
I've got an audience question somewhat related. So in Ontario, the provincial government has a tool called the MZO to speed up development. Does the federal government have a similar tool at their disposal to fast track projects?
Well, so if you take my program, I think it's just important to understand what we do is so the $33 billion that the program that we have, the ISIP program, it's with provinces and territories. So really we are relying on provinces to be working quickly with municipalities, and then we are actually, helping support we're helping invest, but it's really up to those partners. So we are relying on the partners to work quickly. And I think that's critically important. I mean, I think what we don't want to see, though, is moving quickly and you're just saying, well, we're not going to worry about outcomes like the environment because we want to get things done quickly. I think you still need to do the hard work there. But I think there's a lot of lessons learned, and I'm working with my department to look at what are best practices. I think we don't always have to start from scratch. I think there's great practices both in Canada but around the world. And I was just on a call with the OECD, so countries around the world that are looking at what are the best practices in infrastructure to stay on time, on budget, to get multiple outcomes, and to make sure that you're really doing what you said you would do. And we were elected to make historic investments in infrastructure to make a real difference in a range of areas, and that's certainly my focus. But I think that there's always ways to do better, and I think that also how we partner with provinces and directly with municipalities is also critically important.
Are there countries that you're aware of that do this really well and where we can adopt some best practices from?
Well, certainly on the infrastructure assessment, there are countries like Australia, New Zealand, the UK that have really been focused on the long-term planning and also what are the opportunities to create a pipeline of projects that, there may be opportunities for the private sector. So I think there's ways to learn. Community benefits, there are, different examples about how you ensure you get community benefits. And people might say, well, what are community benefits? It's basically making sure that when you build a project, that there are opportunities for the local community, local businesses, small and medium-sized businesses in the community where the project's being built, they get an opportunity to be part of the supply chain. That you think about, how do you ensure there are more women or racialized groups that are participating? And I think that's incredibly important. And I think, as I say, I think we don't have to recreate the wheel, but I do think benchmarking and looking at what works in a very practical way. Like I actually believe, and I've talked to construction companies, talked to unions, there's some really great folks out there, and they say, just tell us what you want. Like if you want 5% or 10%, like whatever it is, just actually tell us. Because sometimes I think government is quite abstract, and so people they don't really know what you mean. As I go to climate, the only increase or reduce emissions is binary. So I think actually saying, what is the standard you wanted to? I think it's a more practical way, which will reduce time, but will also ensure that you get outcomes. But I think you need to build this together. You need to be working with the partners to hear from folks about what is ambitious but achievable.
I want to go back to Infrastructure Bank that you mentioned earlier in your remarks. So the bank has a new chair, Michael Sabia, a new CEO, Aaron Corey, a new growth plan that's been announced. So the bank was created in 2017, but do you really think it's hitting its stride now? And what do you see as the future for the bank?
Yeah, I mean, so it's interesting. So it's called a Canada Infrastructure Bank. It's actually a financing mechanism. So it's actually kind of turning on the head how government, the opportunities to invest in infrastructure. This was something, it was a recommendation that came out of the Economic Advisory Council report to our government. And so it takes a while to set up. And I know there's, that some people have said, well, it's been slow. I think now it is hitting its stride. And I think that Michael Sabia and I, we get along very well. I think it's funny because he's like, Southern Italian, I'm kind of Irish. So sometimes, we have these very frank conversations, but I think that's good. And so I think that you've seen the new growth plan. It's a $10 billion growth plan, but that doesn't mean that it isn't working. The bank isn't working across a range of areas. It's $35 billion. And when people ask me, well, why do you need this? Once again, it's about getting more infrastructure built. When I go to any community or any province, the list that they give me is extremely long. And there isn't enough taxpayer dollars, but also we have pension funds that are investing in other countries. I want those dollars that are coming from Canadian workers to go to work here in Canada. So I think that also with Aaron Corey, he's coming from Infrastructure Ontario. I think you've got really a smart group of people who really understand that we need to get these broad outcomes and that we can leverage the private sector by being creative. And I think that's the opportunity. How do we be creative? And so I'm excited. The first project that they announced under the new growth plan was with Alberta. It was a major irrigation project. People might not think about that, but that's critically important, not just to farmers and ranchers, but to our ag tech industry and to our exports. So I think there's huge opportunities there, and you're going to see that across the board. Yesterday, I was with the Prime Minister and Minister Monsef and Minister Baines announcing our investments in broadband. The Infrastructure Bank has $2 billion, which is committed to investing to connect at least 750,000 Canadians. So that is just a very important and, in fact, critical outcome. So I think these are the opportunities, and the bank is independent. They make their decisions about what projects to invest in, and I think that we're going to really see it ramping up, and I think that's really great. I think it's really great for Canadians because we're going to get more infrastructure built, so we can stretch taxpayer dollars and achieve the outcomes we want.
Let's talk about connectivity and 5G. So we saw the announcement about the remote communities, and that's just getting connected at all. But how is the government thinking about 5G infrastructure, and is it just a private sector issue? I mean, some people have said the investments we make in 5G as a country will set the trajectory, for the next 50 years of the country, like building a railroad back in the day. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, the good news is that this is Minister Bain's portfolio, but I know he's working really hard. I mean, look, connectivity could not be more important. I say this to folks, it's not just about productivity, although it is about productivity, it is about long-term growth. It's also about, whether people can run their business or homeschool their kids or access healthcare. The digital economy is, when you look at businesses like Shopify, the huge opportunity that we have. And so I think that 5G is part of it. Minister Baines is very engaged. And I think that we need to really look at where are the opportunities, but where do we want to be? And, not playing catch up. We need to, be looking across the board, and certainly connectivity is a huge priority of our government. And really, to our future. Even if we didn't have a pandemic, we would have to, it would be absolutely in our interest to connect Canadians, to make sure that we have high-speed broadband, to make sure that, that we're prioritizing these investments. They're really investments in our future. And the economy's changed so much. If you look at where the top 10 companies were, even 5 years ago, you might find energy companies at the top, but now you're seeing it's companies that are in the digital economy. So this is really critical to Canada's future. But we have Minister Baines, I know, is working very hard with this. And I think government and the private sector have a role to play.
As you think about Canada in 10 years with that infrastructure lens, is there a broad vision that you have for the country of what you'd like to see Canada looking like 10 years from now?
So remember, I only work in threes. I think it goes back to, what do I want to see? I want to see more jobs and really strong economic growth. I want to see us on track to be net zero and doing our part, but also leading the way with companies that are all along the supply chain when it comes to the clean economy, a $30 trillion opportunity. And I want to see more inclusive communities. And what do I mean by that? I mean that you just saw a great announcement with Clearwater, that you had the Mi'kmaq big investment, and I think this by indigenous communities. I think that we have the opportunity for everyone to succeed in our country. And I think that we need to be focused on that as well. And so those are the three things. And I think, you can go in detail. What does that mean for broadband? What does that mean for clean drinking water? What does that mean for trade corridors? I think that's all part of it. But I think that we really are very fortunate in Canada. And I think that we can aim even higher. I'm an extremely ambitious person, and I'm ambitious for our country. And that's our long-term competitiveness, because we're a small country. I know we've talked about our Minister of Immigration has done a great job making the case for more immigration, which I think is critical as well. But the key to our growth is investment in infrastructure, smart, targeted, disciplined investments in infrastructure, working with the private sector, as well as other partners like unions, other levels of government, different communities.
Great, and I just got a really interesting question, somewhat COVID related. So, you clearly working quickly to get projects out the door. However, have you had a chance to revisit those projects, and do you foresee making any changes given that Canadians may not go back to commuting the way that they were before?
So I actually get this question a lot when people say, well, public transit, is that over? No. First of all, let's talk about who takes public transit. There are a lot of people who can't afford cars. So one, as I said, inclusivity is incredibly important, but go to climate, my second priority. The GHGs from the transportation sector, they're huge. Quality of life, congestion. We need, and people will, I strongly believe, will take better public transit, and that also creates good jobs and economic growth. Will it take a bit? Yeah, it'll take a bit. And we've been supporting municipalities because it's been really tough for them when it comes to revenues, because really the numbers have dropped greatly because of COVID. But I'm very confident that it will come back, and that we do need good public transit for a whole range of reasons. And when you talk to young people, I have to laugh. I have 3 kids. They're like, a car? Why would I ever have a car? I mean, I was just like, it never occurred to me. The best thing ever was when I was like, 16 years old, and I went to my driver's ed and I passed my test. I was like, amazing. I didn't get a car. I was able to access our, God, we had a K car or something, but I didn't care. I was just like, it was a little bit of freedom in my life. And, but kids don't see that. Young people don't see that. And I think it's really important to not get into the trap, and I'm not suggesting this person is saying this, but not to get into the trap that everything that happens today is going to look like today. You look at automated vehicles, electric vehicles. I was just actually on automated electric vehicle to take folks to LRT in Ottawa. So it would be used to connect the surrounding campus around where LRT was. I mean, there's huge opportunities, but I am quite confident that we do need better public transit for a whole range of reasons. And we're certainly going to continue making the investments in public transit. And we see ambition. So we see ambition in Ontario, huge ambition for major public transit. I got to give out a shout out to Hamilton. I know Hamilton has been very committed to LRT, and LiUNA, the union, very committed. So I think huge opportunity there. Quebec, BC, I mean, across the board. And really, this is about also, as I said, about attracting businesses, talent, people, because people want to live in great communities. And great communities have good public transit. They have clean air, they have clean water, they have natural spaces, they have vibrant businesses. They have good infrastructure where you have community centers that your kids can go to. So I'm very confident that the investments that we're making in public transit are incredibly important to our future of our economy, to more inclusive communities, but also as part of our plan to tackle climate change and reduce emissions.
You were a former environment minister, and I'm sure you sound like you're still very plugged in into that topic, and internationally as well. So it's bring it back to Biden administration. What do you think that Biden's election will mean in terms of climate ambition, and what does it mean for the world?
A world of difference. Look, it's been really hard, and I say this as former Minister of Environment and Climate Change, where for 4 years we were very engaged, and we continue to be engaged internationally on the climate team. It was really tough. Canada worked very hard to continue the ambition and momentum internationally, working with key partners. We created the Ministerial on Climate Action that used to be a different version, was led by the United States. So, but having the U.S. back at the table is incredibly important for a whole range of reasons. One, because of the scale of their economy, because that the influence that they have internationally, and momentum is really important. So the momentum that they will create going into COP26. And it's funny because people say, like, the reason I care about climate change, I mean, of course I care about a more sustainable future for my kids, but there's a clear economic case. And so I think that the fact is they are making and will make the economic case for climate action. And we need ambition. We need ambition across the world. And I think we have a huge opportunity to build a cleaner future. But having the U.S. at the table, I will say, is incredibly important. We worked very closely. I will say, President Trump had a different perspective on this for sure. But you saw U.S. states, cities, and businesses step up during, the administration, the president administration. But I'm certainly I'm very hopeful internationally. I think it'll make a really big difference that is needed. That the reality is we need to tackle climate change. That is much an economic issue as an environmental issue. Otherwise, we will go off the cliff that Mark Carney has talked about. And the economy will adjust, but at huge cost. and it may be too late. So this is something I bring to the infrastructure portfolio too, because the investments in infrastructure will make a big difference into whether we or not we move to the cleaner future. And I think a huge opportunity, economic opportunity for Canada.
And you've spoken, throughout your remarks today about that investments need to do triple duty and that the climate change agenda needs to be part of it. What is the reaction from the private sector? Because we do hear about companies saying it's important, but it's really behind the scenes when you're dealing with the private sector on these projects. Are they prioritizing climate change?
Look, you talk about BlackRock, when you look at the amount of money it has under its control, trillions, I think that is where the world is shifting on a very rational economic basis. That if we don't make this shift, it's very risky for companies that don't make this shift. And so ESG has become incredibly important when people look at their portfolios. So I actually, I'm optimistic. I think I'm an optimistic realist by nature, but I think there's just a rational economic case. And I think that you're seeing the business community come to that. I'd like to see it faster, to be honest. And I'd like to see the business community, when we look at climate disclosure, the business community should be leading the way. Sometimes governments should regulate, but I think there's a real opportunity, and many businesses are stepping up, and we've seen banks step up and others step up. I think it's really the opportunity to step up, because you're going to make better decisions if you're factoring in climate risk. Because otherwise, you are putting yourself at risk, your shareholders at risk, your very business at risk if you aren't doing that, and you're going to miss out on opportunities. And I could go name so many Canadian companies that I've seen that are, really thinking about how do they provide solutions that not just Canadians need, that the world's going to need. There's a great company out of Carbon Cure out of Dartmouth, Nova Scotia, low carbon concrete. It's really critical. The aluminum, there's a partnership, out of Quebec, Alysys, where they're looking at zero carbon aluminum. When you look at the steel, I'm from Hamilton once again, steel, that we can be the country that has the products and the solutions. And those are, yes, clean tech solutions in the way we think of totally new products. But that's also about just throughout, every company needs to be thinking about this as a risk, but also very much as an opportunity. So I feel very optimistic. Obviously there's more to do. And I, certainly have had great conversations with the business community and encourage them, to really step up.
Great. Okay. Down to our last question. And it's a bit personal. So we saw Kamala Harris, her historic win. It definitely brings new excitement for women and girls considering politics. However, you've been at the game for a long time, and unfortunately you've had several public incidents where you were targeted for being a woman. What's your advice to a woman considering entering the fray of politics in 2020?
Get into politics, just do it. Look, it's not easy every day, but it's critically important. And I just am like, a girl from the Hammer who is somehow managed now to be working in a government that's committed to making historic investments in infrastructure, to building our country up, to tackling climate change, to focus on how do we tackle systemic racism and build more inclusive communities. And that's what politics is. And look, I've taken some hits. And I think you do become tougher, and you have to be tough, but I'm willing to support the girls and women who want to get into politics. And I think there are many men and women who are willing to do that too. And you know what? Politics matters, and we can't become disenchanted and disillusioned and cynical, because the decisions that folks in my job make really matter to the future of the country. And I just feel really privileged to be in this role. And that's something, it is really important to me, not just to see more girls aspiring to be in politics and women getting into politics, but also a broader cross-section, a population that looks like, we need politicians to look like our country. And I think that's why Kamala Harris is so exciting, because now a whole new group of folks, if you're Black, if you're, if you're South Asian, if you're a girl or woman, you can see yourself in the vice president. That is really exciting. And I think that's a demonstration how far we've come. And I think that's exciting. And so I'm someone who, I just am really an optimist. And as I say, sometimes there are harder days, but I actually also appreciate the people who have stepped up to support me. And that's Canadians, like across the board, cross political lines. That you see a lot about the politics of politics. I think there are a lot of Canadians who are from all parties who just believe in building a better country. And that's what we have to be focused on. And that's why I got into politics. And that's why all the girls, girls and women out there, I think you should aspire to get into politics. And you don't have to be necessarily, the one who's running. You can support women that run. There's a lot of roles for folks, but we need good people who decide to step up.
Well, thank you, Minister McKenna, for joining us today. We really appreciate your time and your insights. Viewers, we hope that you'll join us for some of our upcoming events. On Thursday, November 12th, we're hosting a panel on making this winter awesome, a total reframe on what many of us are thinking, and managing your own mental health. We'll be joined by Canadian Olympian gold medalist Rosie McLennan and others, and you don't want to miss it. And the following day, Friday, November 13th, we'll host the Honourable Marco Mendicino, Canada's Minister of Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship. Thank you again to Power Corporation for sponsoring today's event. Our events would not be possible without our sponsors, so thank you for your continued generosity. Thank you to our AV supplier, Van Valkenburg Communications, and LiveMeeting.ca for making it possible for us to come together virtually today. Thank you again, Minister. Guests, thank you for joining us. Please stay healthy and stay safe.
Bye, thank you.